Okay, so good morning, everybody. My name is Victor. So for this day two, previously we looked at what data analysis is, what data analytics is, what machine learning is, what AI, what it is. We looked at data analytics. We looked at data science. We looked at AI. Sorry, AI. We looked at machine learning. Then we looked at different tools. We looked at Power BI, which will be starting next week. We looked at Excel, then R, then Stata, then Python, and the rest. Then you also have cloud platforms. Then we also looked at the data science process, which is the assignment that we were given that was not done, but I will still expect the assignment before 12 noon. So this will go on till, let's say, around, for the next 1 hour, let's say around 11:30. Then when we take that short break for like 30 minutes, I will want us to have us tidy up this assignment and send it. Now, we started doing Excel basics. In Excel basics, we tried to look at the entire workbook. We talked about the sheets. So you have a workbook, you have sheet, you now have the tables. In a table, you have rows and you have columns. Then you have the tabs. In the tabs, you have the ribbon. So if you want to recap, I'm just trying to do a recap. If you want to recap, you can check the training series for the previous Saturday. You have ribbon. In the ribbon, for each ribbon, you have groups. So you have groups. Let's say in the home ribbon now, you can see the copy, the paste, and whatever. Then the next group, that's where you have your fonts. That's where you have your size, font size. That's where you have font color, like that. So in this first ribbon, you have quite a lot. So you have the home, you have the insert, you have the page setup, and the rest. Then we also said if you need to do the data science process, one of the basic things you want to do for analytics is to do EDA. Please, you can tell me what is EDA. You can use the chat box, please. EDA, what is EDA? What's EDA? You can use the chat box. So EDA is Exploratory Data Analysis. And in EDA, what we get to do is we do frequency, things like count. Most of us that have done our dashboards, we did things like count, we did things like sum, we did things like average. When you're trying to get average, all of these and all of these items from your data sets, you do things like charts. So last week we evaluated different types of charts and when you should use those charts. We talked about bar chart, pie chart, histogram, and so forth and so on. Line chart, line chart, scatter chart, and all of that. So different type of charts. So for someone that is doing data analytics, you should understand the process. You should understand 1, 2, 3 of the tools. Then you should be able to use it to do exploratory data analysis. Then at the end of the day, to sum up what you are working on, you should be able to create your reports. Now, some of the assignments you are doing is in a bit to help you know how to actually go through the process of collecting your data, analyzing your data, then preparing reports. So at the end of today's class, we are also going to do more dashboards. Then we're also going to be trying to present our reports. In the last class also, we talked about quantitative right? And qualitative. In qualitative, most of the times we are looking at descriptive, right? We're trying to describe the data. So when you're doing exploratory data analysis, you want to like explain what is happening. So it's not enough to just have a chart. It's not enough to just have a chart. You should be able to explain the chart. You should be able to tell this is what is happening to the chart. You should be able to tell this is what the data, what it means and all of that. Because that's what makes you a data analyst. Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you can explain that data set to your boss or your a top level executive or anybody that is going to take action. That's why when we're trying to explain the job of a data analyst, we say is so that we can have insights from the data in order for us to take decisions. Okay, then later on, we now started doing, after some charts, we now went ahead to do some dashboards. So today we're going to further in doing these dashboards. And what's a dashboard? So a dashboard is just a combination of different charts, right? Hope that's clear. So you have a pie chart, you have a bar chart, you have a histogram, you have a line chart and whatever. And you can have filters, you can have slicers, you can have identifications for that. And you can have some kind of textual banners, you can have a background and so on and so forth. So that's where we stopped in the previous class. Now, as a data analyst in task 2 of day 1, you have different types of data. So you have different types of data. So at times your data, you have primary data, you have secondary data. Now, what you do call primary data? So all the while we've been dealing with secondary data. So somebody gives you a data set and say, work on it. Or as data analyst, can you give me insight on this particular data? But in primary data, you are going to create or you're going to collect the data yourself. So you call it primary source. So whereas this one is what? Secondary source. This one is where you're trying to, you get data that is already, like Mr. Tunde now gave you a data set, say you should work on it. Now, at the early stage of our data analytics, we created some data sets by ourselves. But most of those data sets didn't pass some kind of quality assurance. They didn't pass some kind of check and all of that. So starting from day 2, we will go ahead and try to learn the end-to-end process of the job of a data analyst. So it's going to start with objectives, like we said earlier on, then getting the data collection, then cleaning data. At times we say data transformation. Then we have exploratory data analysis. Then you cannot have reports. Then you cannot have decision making. Right? So all we've been doing before now is just to have, at this point, so you have primary here, you have secondary here, secondary source of data. So all we've been doing here before now is just to use data that have already been assigned to us. So what we're trying to do is to go back to this point and try to now go up to this point. So let us start. Now, as a data analyst at work, you might be told to, let's say, conduct a research or do some analysis based on certain things. So you might be told to say, okay, we want to know the impact of let's say inflation on standard of living. Okay, so as I go through this part, I would want us to like use the chat box also to indicate different types of research that we might need to take on, so that at the end of today, let's say before 11, 12, in the next 1 or 2 hours, we should have like 5 research work. We will now have groups, then we will now act on it. So this is just number one. So number two, so here we're trying to look at impact of inflation on standard of living. So in trying to look at this research work, so we're going to have objectives. We're going to have several other things. So let me brainstorm on number two. So you can say, let's say salary and allowance. So I want to look at salary allowance, and I want to look at job satisfaction. So somebody can help us to coin a topic for this and have it on the chat box. So currently I have 2 items. So I have 2 items on my list. So for these 2 items at work, or for any research, or as a data analyst, or if you get a remote role, or if you are part of a committee, or you're working on a project, and you need to actually make decision. And one way to make decision is to do what? Is to make sure that that decision is data-driven. So you hear things like data-driven analysis or data-driven decisions. You hear things like data-driven decision-making. What it means is that whatever decision we make, it's based on data that we have collected. So we're not just acting based on maybe emotions or whatever. We are acting based on the data that we've collected. So I will start with this very first one, the impact of inflation on standard of living. So first thing you want to do, like we said in day one, is for you to define some objectives. So you might want to check, okay, what is the rate of inflation? You might want to get out some data with respect to standard of living. You might want to see the relationship between inflation rates and standard of living. Okay, I think I have a reply now for effects of salary and allowances on job satisfaction. Yeah, so we have effect, we have some words, effect, we have impact, we have the rest. So I'm also going to let you know how to use AI to like make this process slightly faster. So we're looking at the more ideas can come in, please. Relationship between inflation and standard of living. So you can have a lot of objectives. So like I said, we start with let me put it in this box. We start with a task to be done, or a need, or a topic, or a research. The next thing we do is that we define the objectives. The next thing we do questionnaire. Then once we have questionnaire, we collect the data. Then we can now continue. We can now start doing EDA. We can do reports. We can now like make decision. So we are at this point now where we're trying to do objectives, which we are done. So we're done with this and this. The next thing is we want to do questionnaire. So as a data analyst, you need to know what are the standards for questionnaire development. So after this part, I'm going to share like two videos, which will now form the basis of your group work. So somebody have something. Understanding the relationship between compensation and employee satisfaction. Okay, so understanding definitely will really understand. So I can just say, okay, relationship between compensation and employee satisfaction, or we can use a much better word like correlation. So we can say correlation, or we can say relationship. So Rebecca, thank you very much. So let more ideas can come in. So for questionnaire design, what you want to do is that every questionnaire, so just to summarize, there's a document on standardized questionnaire design. I'm going to provide it during our break, and I'm also going to give you a video that explains with different case studies and the rest. But just for the purpose of this class and the assignment you're going to work on, I will summarize by saying if you want to do a questionnaire, make sure that you divide your questionnaire in parts. Sorry. So have your questionnaires in parts. So what do I mean? You can have an introduction. So you're going to state what you actually want to do. Then you're going to have a preliminary information. So you're going to have things like your gender, if you need to collect it, right? Because one thing also with collecting primary data is that you don't want to be subjective, or you also don't want to be biased. So things like location, don't forget, most of your research work also should have focus. So you should have some level of specificity. It should be very specific in the sense that it should try to solve a particular problem. Because at the end of the day, a data analyst is to ensure that he or she solves a particular problem. You see this need here, this need that you have here, this need that you have here, this need you have here, this research, this question you are trying to answer. So you might have answers to some questions you're looking for. At the end of the work, you should be able to answer that question. So if I say impact of inflation on the standard of living, you should have something like in Nigeria. You should have something like in Port Harcourt. Another standard for questionnaires, you should ensure that you have spread. I'll explain that. Take, for instance, if you're trying to collect data for a research analysis you're working on, and you said Nigeria. So this is the map of Nigeria. I hope I tried. No, this is Africa. So you have something like this. Right? You have something like this. So this is Abuja here. This is Lagos here. This is Port Harcourt here. So if the research work is Nigeria, what it means is that you should ensure that you collect. So Nigeria is divided into 6 geographical locations. So you should make sure that out of the 6, you collect data in each part. So that's the spread. It's only when you collect data from the entire part that any decision that you make is going to be binding on the entire part. So that's what we call sample size. Right? That's what we call sample size. So our sample size is a small part, the entire population. So If I want to do a research work based on Nigeria, and they said as a data analyst, we need to do something and something and something, and the data is not being given to you, it then means you're going to start the process from, that is the tax. You ask, okay, what are you trying to look out for? Once you get that, you now pen down the different objectives that you can have. You now create the questionnaire like that before you start doing the analysis, before you start importing it into Excel or into Power BI. I hope everybody's following. So if you are told to do if you are told to do, we're trying to look at sample size. So if you are told to do something on job satisfaction, the question is where? So is it going to be in an agency of government? So which agency? So you hear things like maybe relationship or effect of staff allowance and or remuneration and job satisfaction in government agencies in Nigeria with a case study in something, right? Or we're trying to look at the impact of pollution or air pollution in riverine areas in Nigeria. Case study, let's say we say a town in Port Harcourt or a town in Ondo State or a town in whatever, any of those areas where you have exploration. So there must be target, you must have specificity, you must have some kind of focus, you must be very specific. Then you should not be biased, right? So you don't just take a decision or put in any data based on what you feel. Then I said you must have spread. So for spread, you must use a sample size. I'm going to tell you as we move on in the training how you're going to get your sample size or what's the number that makes sense for a particular population. Like if the population of this particular small town is 1 million, so there's an amount of persons that you must serve this questionnaire. If it's job satisfaction for an agency, for a company that is 100 persons, total staff membership, 100 persons, you must collect data from a certain number of persons before this, your research or this, your analysis can make sense. So that's what we call empirical evidence. So quite a lot of data analysts can just see data and plug into Excel or plug into Power BI and achieve something. If you don't understand this, it will be difficult for you when you now start seeing some complex data set or whatever, or Excel sheets or CSV files, for you to be able to say, okay, this is what I have as my data set. These are what my objectives can be. And this is the kind of dashboard I should create, or this is the kind of insight I should create from this data set. So it takes you way back to somebody that can actually intelligently bring out analysis from a data set. So that you don't find yourself just clicking on the, what's it called, on the columns and just dragging it. Anything you find there, you say, okay, I'm done. Because you are also going, because that's just quantitative, you're also going to do some qualitative analysis. Qualitative means that you're going to describe what is actually happening. And for you to be able to describe what is actually happening, you must know the objectives and know what business insights you want to solve or you want to create. Okay, so we have spread. So you should have spread, you should have samples. As I said, I'm going to tell you how you should have, what's it called? The sample size. So let me do a recap. So have your questionnaire in parts, introduction, preliminary like gender, location, and all of that. Then you should have these objectives. You should channel these objectives into the questionnaire. Then you can have some open-ended parts. You can have some open-ended part where you want to like gauge the responses of those individuals. That part is actually beyond the scope of this course because that's where you start doing things like qualitative analysis, where you do maybe use Python and do some bubbles and do some sentiment analysis on the rest. Actually beyond the scope because that is data science. So that one you have to do after analytics, you can now move into that so that you can now maybe do some forecast. So you can have some open-ended questions, then of course you cannot have a conclusion. Then another thing you want to make sure you do in your questionnaire is that you want to tell people why you are collecting it. Then you also want to like uh, make them see reasons why they are contributing to you doing this particular analysis. So I think this is just a few of them. I will give you a document that is about some pages, then a video that explains the document is on the channel. I'm going to give it to you. But we are going to go ahead to pick one of these stuff. We'll work on it, get a questionnaire, create the Google form for it, distribute the questionnaires. Next week, we're not going to be analyzing the data set. Or by Wednesday, Thursday, if we've gotten enough data set, by next week, we cannot analyze it, work on it on Excel, then work on it on Power BI. So with that, you are armed with the know-how or how to conduct a research end-to-end.